So for example, American Trucking Association, they projected something like we're going to see a shortage of drivers up to about like 160,000 by year 2030, right? And we actually even have a shortage today. They said in 2024, there was a shortage of about 60,000 drivers, right? So when you have sort of this like backdrop of, increased freight demand and shortage in drivers, I think our partners and us as a company see that there's a real opportunity there where AVs can fill a really critical gap.
Trucking is difficult. It's an essential industry that every corner of the nation depends on, even without knowing it. To the average consumer, the supply chain is magic, and sometimes a black hole. Products on store shelves, dinner on restaurant tables, packages on doorsteps. It's expected to be there on time, every time, and only recognized if there's a service failure. But how is a sausage made? Who's talking about the issues that matter to trucking companies?
Welcome to True North Truck Thought, or the TTT Pod for short, a monthly podcast hosted by Scope Elitist Transportation Consulting and brought to you by True North Companies. We're here to demystify the magic, address the black holes, and to talk trucking to the industry we love. Whether it's the latest research, upcoming laws and rules, safety issues and solutions, or practical discussions about real-life supply chain challenges, the TTT Pod is here to help the most important industry in our country to navigate its greatest challenges and opportunities. We bring together some of the best and brightest experts to talk about and tackle some of the most pressing industry issues. So without further ado, I'm Steve Kepler.
And I'm Sean Garney. Let's get trucking. The autonomous trucking landscape has seen significant advancements recently. Just a few weeks ago, self-driving technology company Waabi announced a partnership with Volvo to develop autonomous big rigs. This collaboration aims to integrate Waabi's virtual driver system with Volvo's VNL autonomous trucks, with plans to launch commercial pilots in Texas. Meanwhile, Torc Robotics has revamped its growth strategy for 2025, focusing on building an autonomous hub in Texas and expanding its footprint in Michigan, while winding down operations in New Mexico and Germany. On the regulatory front, the U.S. Department of Transportation has been slowly developing its plan for autonomous vehicle initiatives, aiming to establish a framework for autonomous vehicle development. This includes recent guidelines from the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration for autonomous driving systems, emphasizing safety and operational protocols. Additionally, the Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association has released policy recommendations urging federal action to advance American leadership in autonomous vehicle technology. To help us unpack these developments and explore what they mean for drivers, fleets, and the industry at large, I'm joined by two leading voices in the field. Sam Loesche, Head of Policy and Public Affairs for Waabi, and Anita Kim, Director of Government Affairs and Policy at Torc Robotics. Sam and Anita bring unique perspectives from companies at the forefront of developing and deploying autonomous trucking technology. We'll discuss where this technology stands today, the challenges ahead, and how driverless trucks could complement and not compete with the current workforce. So buckle up. This conversation you won't want to miss. Let's get rolling. Sam and Anita, thank you so much for being here. JB, welcome back. As always, Steve, I get to look at your pretty face every day, so I'm just happy to see you again. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Yeah, I'm sorry you have to deal with that every day. But there's not much I can do about it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. Really appreciate you joining us today. There's obviously a lot of activity in this space, and I think, the Trump administration historically in his last term was very trying to advance AV technologies, which we think is a good thing. We'll see if that holds true here for this administration. And just to start off, just at a higher level, and this, I guess, for both of you, maybe start with you, Sam. What benefits really do AVs offer to fleets, and are they safe? We've got lots of questions out there and a lot of naysayers, but what's your thoughts there to help paint the picture for us?
Yeah, no, thanks for having me, and appreciate the question, Steve. Look, I think at the step one of all of this, right? At least I'll only speak for my company. We're not doing this for the sake of doing it, right? We're doing it because we really see that there's a huge need in the industry, really starts with, the difficulty, recruiting and then retaining, qualified drivers. But then it extends well beyond that, right? There are just obviously huge operational constraints that you face in a traditional trucking company, just when it comes to uptime and asset utilization, right? A lot of truckload fleets are getting 6 to 7 hours a day of utilization time on an asset. That's pretty crazy when you consider how much money is being spent on a tractor. There's got to be a better way, right? And so that's really why our founder really launched Waabi. I believe a lot of others in the space kind of saw the same problem. I think it was really exacerbated or put into focus, kind of during COVID, right, when supply chain, crunch became, as bad as it has almost ever been. And so we just see autonomy as exactly as you said, another cog in the wheel to help, move goods more efficiently and get stuff to where it needs to go more quickly, but also safely, right? I think you're right to identify, the lingering questions that some people have of, are these going to be safe? I think it's really important to know that, at least for my company, right, we are hyper aware that you get one shot at the apple here, right? You need to be safe. You need to be safe every single day. That means technology safety, which is why we really leaned into a next generation kind of AI based approach that we think is really going to, help transform how an AV can be built. But it also means just operational safety, right? It's all the things that all your listeners do day in, day out. It's having a safe operational framework. It's having an SMS program in place that's really going to make sure that the vehicles are upkept and in good working order every single day. The stakes are just raised even more, and we have zero tolerance for anything that will really put us or any other road users at risk. So it's incumbent on us to be able to prove that safety, right? And we're up for the challenge and we're looking forward to it.
Right.
Anita, thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I second everything that Sam said. I mean, for me, when you talk about what safety benefits AVs offer, I think autonomous technology, they present a tremendous opportunity to improve roadway safety. I actually used to work at the U.S. Department of Transportation. We would look at, roadway safety statistics all the time. And we all know that vehicle crashes a lot of the times are due to some type of human error, human-related factor. Actually, before this call, it was really interesting. I was looking at this DOT study from a while back, and they cited that driver-related factors were the kind of critical reason in approximately about 87% of crashes involving large trucks, right? And so these are due to recognition errors, maybe decision errors, so driver fatigue. And so I think when you think about autonomy and autonomous trucks, they're just not going to engage in the kind of driving behaviors that humans do, right? AVs are not going to drive impaired. They're not going to drive fatigued. They're not going to be distracted. So, I think there's a huge safety potential and benefit out there. And frankly, I would not be working in this industry if I didn't think that was true. So,
yeah, I love that. And, I was just watching, not to go too far off the script already, but, safety is the linchpin of this whole situation. And we've been talking, a lot of folks talk in absolute terms about we need to be absolutely safe and 100% recognize that we need to be safe. Now, I was watching a video on the CBC, Sam, I'm sure you're familiar with this, with Waabi and the president of your organization, who was talking about your efforts. And what she said is, by not putting AV trucks on the road, we're more people are dying, right? We have these opportunities. But I also want to frame up something else about the way that we think about this, right? Like thousands of people are dying every day, right? Because of human error, right? And it is possible and likely that an automated driving system could make an error. Or, as is very frequently possible, some passenger vehicle can just run into an AV truck anyway. So accidents are going to happen. But for all of us in this room that have been pursuing safety our entire careers, while the road to zero is a great aspirational goal, what we're looking for today is to make us safer than yesterday. And I think that's a big difference. And so, there's not even a question in there. That's just me saying what I think. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree, but I'm really encouraged by the safety case here.
No, you're right, Sean. We have that. It's unfortunate that we've come to accept an equivalent of a 737 crashing every single day on our roadways. And I think that it's somewhat of an unfair comparison with the AV community, because you're right, Sam, that you get one shot at it. And frankly, we need to change the dynamics. And I think you all have the opportunity to actually lead in that space, because you're starting to experience and accumulate many million miles of travel. So, I think it helps, in my view, frame the whole conversation going forward about safety. And so that's great. So maybe let's tack a little bit. Maybe Sam, is for you. What's your experience right now? Kind of what's the current state of play with kind of your commercial operations and working with fleets? Where do you see that right now?
Yeah, no, we've been, public that we're running pilots, on I-45, between Dallas and Houston. We really build a system that is built for safety, for conquering, what the industry calls edge cases. These are things that happen very infrequently, but when they do happen, are very, very dangerous, right? I mean, think about a deer running out in front of you, or someone blowing a tire. If you're in a truck, a four-wheeler blowing a tire in front of you and veering off into your lane, right? The things that human drivers kind of live on edge for all the time, and kind of spend their whole career trying to be prepared for. That's what our system is built to conquer. But the other part is scalability, right? We really think that when you leverage the full power of kind of generative AI to understand those edge cases, the things that happen infrequently, train your system based on them, you can scale from just 1 lane to 2 lanes to 3 lanes to 15 lanes much more quickly than you otherwise could. That's really the really exciting part that we see. As an opportunity, for us, but then also for the industry as a whole, for our commercial partners. We've been public of deep partnership we have with Uber Freight that includes kind of guaranteed miles on their platform, right? So, we are guaranteed to offer a certain amount of, autonomous truck basically hauls for them and their customers. So, we're really at that fun part of the industry where it's going from, science project to commercialization effort right now, where you're seeing it actually come into practice. And that's exciting, because I think you get to see the safety benefits then, you get to see the potential of the fuel economy benefits, and you get to really see the supply chain benefits all actually happen instead of just being talked about anymore.
So interesting, from science project to deployment, and something I think a lot of people have been thinking about for a long time. Anita, what are fleets saying about the science project, right? Like, fleets aren't jumping in right away, all in. They're a little bit more reserved, I think. They're waiting to see. Some of them are waiting, some of them on the forefront. Where do they see the biggest benefits? I opened this podcast by talking about supplementing the workforce and improving efficiencies. Where do fleets see their best opportunities there?
And I think Sam touched a little bit about this, right? About sort of the operational efficiencies and how there can be some real benefits there. One thing I will say is that Torc actually has a really great sort of industry advisory group that we work with, right? Like, this group includes major shippers, carriers, companies, and we meet with them on a regular basis to make sure that we have a really good pulse of like what's going on in the freight industry. And when we talk to them, our partners are very excited about the future of AVs and the role that they can play in their fleet, right? So you talked a little bit about like drivers, right? So again, I'm back to like kind of a little bit of the data person here, so we've seen some studies, and there are some stats out there that when you think about sort of the demand for freight traffic in the future, that's going to increase, right? So we're going to have this sort of like huge growth in like freight traffic, while also facing some potential gaps or future gaps in driver supply, right? So for example, American Trucking Association, they projected something like we're going to see a shortage of drivers up to about like 160,000 by year 2030, right? And we actually even have a shortage today. They said in 2024, there was a shortage of about 60,000 drivers, right? So when you have sort of this like backdrop of, increased freight demand and shortage in drivers, I think our partners and us as a company see that there's a real opportunity there where AVs can fill a really critical gap, right? And so we're filling that gap. We're creating supply chain stability, resiliency, and a part of the reason that the sort of challenges exist with drivers is that the industry is seeing challenges in driver retention, driver recruitment, and frankly, just the demographics of drivers today. A lot of them are at that age where they're going to be like hitting retirement in the next 15, 20 years, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to see a whole shift that's coming. And I think our fleet partners, they recognize this and they see AV as a way to, like fill their, like I said, fill that supply chain resiliency, create a really stable network. And, there's a real opportunity there. So that's kind of what we're hearing. And like I said, we're going to continue to work with our sort of industry partners to, always get a sense about what the future tells us or what we think is going to happen in the future.
Yeah. I was reading an article today that called it the alleged driver shortage problem. We know there's a debate out there. But if you dig into the numbers, you also know that the driver shortage lives in some segments more than others. Right. So particularly the over-the-road, irregular routes type stuff is tough to staff because the job is so hard. Do you think that's going to be a sweet spot for AVs, Sam or Anita?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was, if you don't mind. Yeah. Shonda, how you kind of phrase the question too of kind of how these commercial partners that we talk to are thinking about it. It's not this, aggregate number, right? It's more their operational realities day after day, right? They have certain lanes, depending on, if they're a private fleet, if they're, for hire, if they're in the LTL space or truckload, right? Depends on their exact business model. And a lot of them will often have, though, either irregular routes or maybe they're more regular, but they're still very hard to staff, right? I mean, there are certain drivers, as you all know, who maybe don't want to go from the Midwest to the Southwest, right? It's just, it's a challenging route, right? It can be very hot during the summer, it can be very flat and boring, right? And so it's just more challenging. They are facing, and they know their data and their employees better than anyone. They look at that and say, hey, I have higher turnover by 50, 100, 200% on this route than I do anything else. What kind of solutions can I explore that will help alleviate that, right? It's that kind of nitty gritty evaluation analysis that we're seeing really sophisticated fleets and shippers start to look at and figure out how to plug AVs in, and that's to your initial kind of point of how they're approaching it. Are they willing to dip their toe in the water? I think it's really forcing their hand that they need to, right? Or else nothing's going to change.
I'm going to jump in right quick. I think that just talking about drivers, really interesting. I came from the trucking side, moved to the insurance side. We know drivers have over the years kind of migrated to they want to get home more often. If they're not home once a week, they want to be home every other night or something. And so I see AV being able to fill that slot where you have routes or turns that don't allow companies to get drivers home on at least a weekly basis, and that's probably good for the motor carrier and good for the industry.
Well, and I think one thing that Sean, you mentioned OTR. We've been talking about OTR, and I think one of the things you see a lot in the media that some of the naysayers they think some of them think that it's going to impact wholesale industry change tomorrow, right? And drivers are going to be out of their jobs, and there's a lot of that kind of misinformation to some degree out there. And you talked about OTR, but are there other kind of operation? We're going to see probably a phased in of this technology. Let's be realistic, right? It's not, the industry is very diverse. Are there particular operational design domains that might lend themselves better to AV deployment versus others? I mean, maybe you guys can talk about that a little bit. Maybe Anita, start with you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess I wouldn't say better than the other. What I would say is that there are different operating environments and different use cases for AVs, right? And so for us, for example, we're looking at the long haul trucking application. That's the use case that we're interested in. And for us, what that sort of means is that we're looking at kind of that hub to hub concept. So pick up a loaded trailer at a hub right off the interstate. You travel for that, several hundred miles along the interstate. Then you get off at the interstate at another hub and drop off that trailer, right? So for us, the operating environment, it's mostly interstates, mostly straight, long roads, which frankly, we think tend to be a bit simpler and more predictable, especially when you compare that to a dense urban environment. So for example, in an interstate environment where we're going to be operating, we're not going to be encountering a lot of complex traffic signals, pedestrians, crosswalks, bike lanes, scooters. Those are all things that you encounter more in a dense urban environment. And so I think from that standpoint, I think we think kind of the interstate highway environment, a bit more predictable, a bit more simpler from that standpoint. And that's kind of the roadway environment that we're going to be operating in and where we feel like our use case and application really fits.
So Anita, I read earlier today, there was a conference in Vegas, a big conference in Vegas. Peter from your company, he said, the technology is solved. That's what he said. He said, I'm going to make a bold statement. This technology is solved. We're moving to deployment. And I want to bounce that off of something else I read, which was that Landline reported earlier this week that state legislatures are really moving on AV. I can recall being at ATA when we first started talking about this and everybody saying, please, feds, please offer us a roadmap. Else we're going to get, a spider web of regulations out there in the states. Landline reported that 11 states have introduced legislation. Every one of them includes the requirement for a safety driver physically present. What's this going to do to our timeline? If our technology is solved and the states are saying, I don't believe you, can we only run in Texas? Because everybody runs in Texas. What's going to happen here? Like, how do we actually deploy? What's our plan, right? For both of you, for any of you, for JB, for all I care. What are we going to do?
Sam, or do you want to go?
Yeah, sure. No, I'm happy to start. I think Sean, an important difference here is when you say it's the state, introducing this idea. It's not, right? It's one or two individual standalone lawmakers who are being kind of pushed by one or two of their constituencies, usually the trial lawyers and the Teamsters to go and push these kind of ideas. And they have been completely rejected in almost every state that has been proposed. This isn't the first year that this idea has kind of come up, right? Yeah. Anyone who follows politics or, legislative, comings and goings knows that, a lot of good ideas and a lot of bad ideas get proposed every single year in both states and in the federal government. That doesn't mean that they have the blessing of, that body or that state. And it's incumbent on us to then go and educate people about why it's a bad idea. And I think once we do that process, you've seen what the result is. People kind of start scratching their head and saying, hey, why am I going to, potentially, kill or put roadblocks up for an industry, that's going to save lives on my roadways and, help with a lot of the supply chain challenges I've really seen grow. And I know we're going to grow in the future, right? It doesn't make sense. So you've seen, I think, a lot of these things introduced and then quickly rejected because, they don't stand the test of time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that's a really important point, right? We've seen these kinds of bills introduced before where it requires a human presence, and yet none of them have been successful because I think once legislators start to peel kind of the layers back and really look at what this could do to the industry, what it could do to innovation in their state, what it can do to the freight economy in their state, I think they realize like, hey, this is not really like the path forward here. And so, I agree with Sam. We'll see, but yeah, I think policymakers do understand that the benefits that the technology can bring, and once they sort of understand that, these bills hopefully aren't successful and will continue to not be successful. So.
Well, it's interesting, guys. I think part of the challenge is a lot of lawmakers don't understand trucking and the freight business.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Come on, Steve. That's not true.
I know for a fact. I've talked to many of them. But I think a lot of those states are jumping in because of the lack of leadership at the federal level. Right? There's no real federal leadership, and as we know that in transportation, particularly in freight with interstate commerce, we need to have standards as much as possible, standard operating rules to operate under, really to make the business work. And so I think in your guys' estimation in from the federal side, what would you like to see? I know there's lots of conversations going on, but where do you think are the key areas that the federal level really should help set those guide rails, if you will, and where they should focus their efforts to help get a more systematic and continuous solution out there to help guide deployment better.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think sort of playing on what we were talking about a minute ago, right? I think it's really important that we want to see less of a state by state approach, right? We want to see a stronger national framework when it comes to AVs, because this is going to provide the industry with some regulatory certainty. It's going to provide some consistency across the nation and stability so that companies can really focus on continuing to innovate and advance the technology rather than trying to comply with a bunch of different regulatory requirements that are varied across 50 different states, right? And so I think there's a lot of room and opportunity where the federal government can provide that national framework, consistency around standards, vehicle equipment safety standards, around regulations. And so that is kind of where we can see some leadership opportunity to come in. And then I guess I'll just say, as a part of that, I think continued dialogue and collaboration with industry is going to be important as we sort of get into the nitty-gritty details about what that looks like.
Quick question here, and as we're talking about challenges, what are y'all seeing from the insurance industry?
I was going to ask you that, JB.
Well, I'm curious if there's been any conversations that either of you companies have had with insurance carriers and feedback that you're getting from them.
I mean, I'll hop in. I mean, I think JB, there's definitely interest, right? There is a lot of questions. I think some of our colleagues at other companies in the industry have actually done a great job of also putting the data behind what this could potentially mean for insurance claims, eventually insurance rates, really more on the personal mobility side than the trucking side. But the landscape you all know is in nuclear verdicts in general are not only the bane of the industry today, but are becoming more and more of an issue every single year. The facts behind some of these decisions are so crazy. I don't think normal people understand why $100 million verdict is being levied against company X when their driver did nothing wrong, right? And so something's got to give. I think insurers are quickly recognizing that as well. And the only guaranteed way to avoid paying out claims selfishly for them is to avoid getting into accidents, right? And so you can do that with a human-centric workforce. You can train people. You can put in place incentive programs all you want, but you overlay that with the turnover and recruitment challenges that the industry faces. And there's inherent difficulties doing it, right? When in the truckload space, if you have 90% of your workforce kind of coming in new every year, all the training you want is always gonna reach a ceiling, right? There's only so much you can do. I think that's why people, not just in AVs, but fleets have really turned to technology in general to help try to kind of raise the bar for them. And AVs is kind of the next natural evolution, right? The other important piece that we offer as an industry is the ability for accident reconstruction, full kind of understanding of what happened around the truck, full understanding of what we as an AV, as the truck, digital virtual driver did in a certain situation. That reaches a level of detail that no amount of forward-facing cameras or even inward-facing cameras, if you got them, are really going to provide to you on the human-centric side, right? We can see not quite 360 degrees, but complete visibility around the vehicle at all times. We understand how much the brakes are being applied versus not. We understand how much acceleration is being applied versus not. When you see other actors on the roads, right? So I think for insurers, it's a data-centric kind of approach that they've really long looked for, and hopefully for them, I think, to avoid having to pay out claims and eventually having to be able to lower rates and get new customers in, but at the end of the day, really avoiding accidents, right? Because I think that's where everyone's interests really meet.
Well, and I think you're right, Sam. We've seen just with dash cams, the amount of that's impacted just the litigation side of the house in the industry and exonerating drivers in many cases and stopping crazy lawsuits from starting in the first place. And I think that's a really important point that I think gets lost on a lot of people, is having that, not just having the assisting situational awareness, but being able to see what's happening outside. That's a really good point.
What a fascinating concept, Sam, which I sadly hadn't really thought through, but like this idea that you're collecting so much data, this 360 view of data that can then be used to break down crash scenarios and then in turn educate fleet managers and drivers on ways to like appropriately react. I think about this hilarious federal government document from like 25 years ago that like listed out like, I forget what it was called, Steve. Maybe you remember it. Listed out like 7 or it was like 25 different crash scenarios, and then the appropriate countermeasures that take. But that was just a bunch of probably old white guys sitting in a room talking about crashes. And the countermeasures seemed intuitive, but I think there's so much more that we can take from the data from these crash scenarios to educate the casual motorist and the professional driver to really elevate that. So at risk of asking a question that was not on the list, are there plans to sort of package some of that education and knowledge and make that available to other drivers or other companies, or maybe it's a recruiting tool or whatever else? But I think every driver out there wants to be safe. Some drivers fear AVs, but if we can take that knowledge we've gained from the data and apply it to our existing driver workforce, now we've just multiplied our safety savings, right?
Yeah, I mean, Anita, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Sam.
I was just
you got to
gonna
respond to that.
No, I mean, I think it's a really interesting idea. The piece I think that we've seen, at least so far, is that really, it's still early days in the industry, right, in terms of the actual commercialization. Mm-hmm. I think really sophisticated fleets, though, are really taking a look inward, right, and seeing, okay, what stretches of roadway have we historically had, repetitive issues with, right? Sure. Across different generations, across different drivers, right, and we can kind of, as AV companies, plug in and see how a system would perform in those certain situations, likely better than a human driver would, right? Maybe it's low visibility or kind of, certain amounts of inclement weather, right? Maybe it's right as, a driver's getting onto, 9 or 10 or 11 hours of driving time and, fatigue is starting to hit in, whatever it is, overlaying, again, this is not a technology that's meant for the ether, right? It's meant to actually help hard and fast, actual concrete things that you're facing in your fleet. We set up a driver advisory board for this exact purpose too, right? We got multiple million-mile safe drivers to come in and tell us, what do they find are the most challenging situations, that they've experienced in their careers, and then we go break them down, right? Okay, in X, Y, and Z situation, if you're facing a merge where two different actors are going in front of you and behind you, what do you think the best, safest driving behavior is, right? So we can kind of help coax our system into doing the same, but also knowing that, it's pretty amazing to see a bunch of, 2 or 3 million safe mile drivers battle it out about what the safest action is in those situations. There's not always one right answer, right? So, getting the industry to the point of true safety and kind of blending everyone's experience together is really the fun part of what we get to do.
Yeah, that's really great.
Anita, any thoughts there?
No, I was just going to say it's an interesting thought, right, that Sean brought up. I think there is sort of a question or opportunity to see what can we do with this data that we collect already, right, and how can it improve our understanding of roadway safety? Are there certain stretches of the road that sees more types of crashes than others, right? So rather than having, like you said, a bunch of guys sitting in a room, and when you mentioned that, I think I know the report, and I may know some of the guys who are probably sitting in a room. But yeah, I mean, how can we facilitate their conversation or their thought process, right? Like, can we use the data that the companies are already collecting to really enhance that and get to a deeper understanding of what roadway safety looks like? So I think there's opportunity there. Yeah. Yeah,
because if you think about it, crashes, while they happen a lot, they're really rare events, right? And so we spend a lot of money and energy on doing crash analysis, crash reconstruction, and having a much broader set of data with near misses and all kinds of other things that really have never even been contemplated before, can really add value to really enhancing the entire safety situation across on the road. So I think it's certainly an interesting thought there. So So I guess question is for both of you. Maybe start with you, Sam. But so what do you see? Like, what's right in front of us? Like, what are the kind of the near term challenges or issues you guys are kind of working on to get AVs more mainstreamed?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up an important point about kind of the role of the federal government, right? I think we've been tremendously pleased with what the Trump administration did in their first go round, right? I mean, I think they actually deserve a lot of credit for where the industry is in general because of the work that they did for what they call AV 2.0, 3.0 guidance, right? For all of us to know how to operate, how do we interact with hours of service rules, a lot of rules that weren't written, when before an AV was even to twinkle in someone's eye, right? How are we supposed to integrate with the current FMCSR's type regulatory framework? We expect them to continue that, and there are a couple things that I think we as an industry really need them to hit the ground running on, to give us that certainty for the next kind of wave of challenges that we've identified. Really, we could use more information and leadership from them on. So I think that's definitely a piece that will really put rocket fuel in the tank, for all of us, my company included. But the next step is really just allowing, I think, what we've cultivated, I think, all together in terms of support from key states where we're all operating in. Texas has proven to be a leader here, not just in terms of the laws that they've written, but also just the understanding from the government, from the nonprofit worlds, from the academic community, about what this can offer, and really rallying around the industry to say, okay, how can we be of help? How can we help promote kind of the safest adoption possible, and also really happily accept all of the jobs and benefits that come with companies like, I think, both of ours, being successful. That to me is really the roadmap for how this industry can thrive and kind of bloom, but also a roadmap that should really be adopted by other states and eventually the feds. So only thing I'll add then too is it's eventually the point too where I think both Anita and I get out of the way in some ways and let all of our technical folks, their work shine, right? All the things that they've spent, years and at times decades working on, to actually go out and do what it was built to do in a driverless format. It's the other really exciting part that we get to be a part of.
I think what I'll just say, just because Sam brought up Texas, I think Texas and Texas DOT in particular, they've done a great job in terms of sort of acting as like a convener and creating a very collaborative, sort of environment. So, they've brought together industry stakeholders, policymakers, academia, and they've really sort of engaged this like broad group of diverse stakeholders to create and sort of ask the question about how do we support AV and kind of the innovation, the benefits that the technology will bring, and how do we make this happen in Texas? So I just want to highlight, I do think that is like a great role that a state DOT can play or a state can play in the future. And that's all part of this like future pathway, as you mentioned, mainstreaming, in terms of how you actually mainstream this technology in the long run, right? Another thought about just sort of like mainstreaming when I think about this, I think the more familiar that policymakers, the public, our partners, they sort of see the technology up close, they take rides, they really see the benefits of what this technology can do in their fleets, the more sort of like interaction you have with it, I think also is part of that kind of really critical education piece, which really fuels the adoption. It really fuels that kind of like, understanding of what the technology is, what it isn't, and that will also bring us to that kind of mainstreaming piece that's so important.
Yep, good point. I think that's something that we need is more publicity. I was just thinking about, hearing about how many million miles that AV, equipment is running, and are there white papers or what publicity is there out there for not only the lawmakers and government officials, but general public, because that's a big unknown. We hear about AVs and probably have passed one or two. I don't know, but what is out there to start bringing the general public up to speed on what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just put in a plug for an organization called PAVE, PAVE. It's called Partners for AV Education. Their mission is entirely all about sort of educating the general public, policymakers, stakeholders, all around AVs, right? Everything from kind of the basics of the technology to, what it means to what the industry is doing. So, they actually have a great website that talks a lot about, kind of where the industry is at, and they run events. Actually, we participated in an event, I think it was like last October, where we brought a truck to the Texas State Fair. So that was, talk about a great, way to kind of really engage the public at the very kind of hands-on level. And a few of us companies participated, all organized through PAVE. So, I would say that there are associations and groups like this out there that really hone in on that education piece, and that would be one to look at.
Good information. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Part of the challenge I see with this space at the federal level in particular is historically the government has been looked to as the expert in safety from a regulatory standpoint, right? And in the AV space, they're not the experts. You guys are the experts. You understand the technology. You've built the technology. So, in this new type of world and environment, I think you're right, Anita. The collaborative approach makes a lot of sense in the way Texas has approached it. And I think the federal government and the stakeholders need to kind of pull back on the reins a little bit and not try and constrain innovation, right? Let's help foster it and facilitate it, but give it the right guide rails. And I think in that vein, I know NHTSA just put out its AV STEP proposal, right, as a kind of a voluntary type approach. And I don't know, Sam, if either of you guys have had a chance to look through that in any real meaningful way. It's pretty detailed, but I think it's a way, the way that I'm interpreting it is NHTSA saying, look, we want to step our toe in the water. We've got some things we think about here, but we want to make it voluntary. We want to let industry lead, but we want to capture a lot of data. Do you have any sense of whether that is directionally the right way to go? What are some thoughts there?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of good in the approach, right? I think, Steve, to your point, right, recognizing that an agency in DOT that's very used to exactly your point, kind of like human-centric, human factors kind of crashes and crumple zones on cars, and understanding that traditional reality has not historically been built to understand this technology, right? I mean, there are very few companies and even researchers and computer scientists who do. So I think accepting that there's that limitation from and no slight intended, right. but that limitation does exist from a regulatory standpoint is important. And also overlaying that with the fact that you do want the industry to succeed, you need to do your duty as a regulator to oversee safety, but also not kind of constrain innovation is a hard tricky kind of balance to strike. I think voluntary programs like that, where they can kind of coax more and more information, say from companies like ours, to help them kind of understand what the systems can do. To what Anita said, what they can't, is a really important step for helping them get up to speed. But I think kind of keeping one eye on the ball here too, that it can never kind of go too intense in terms of trying to prescribe certain things, at least at this stage of the industry, in order to kind of make sure that this technology continues to be developed here, right? I mean, there's a reason that, in spite of, a lot of European-based OEMs, right, operating in the trucking space now, that Europe is not leading in AV trucking developments in any kind of way, right? I don't think that it has anything to do kind of with more than just really, really difficult kind of regulatory environment you see in trying to, build and deploy, a normal human-based fleet across Europe, much less an autonomous fleet where you need to get kind of a type approval for the vehicle before you can go and put it out on the roads of one country alone, much less, traversing, 5 or 10 different countries, as you go through. We need to kind of maintain, that competitiveness, to make sure that, it doesn't, escape to Europe. And then also, obviously, China has invested, tens and tens of billions of dollars into their own industry as well. It's incredibly important to make sure that I think companies like ours are, see a path towards deployment, see a path towards safe deployment. But selfishly, I think we all also want to make sure that no really unsafe actor is allowed to kind of come into the space, because again, I think it only takes one bad apple to spoil the whole bunch. And luckily, I think we have a pretty good cadre of other companies operating the space now.
Awesome. I know that we're kind of rounding third and sort of sliding into home in a technical perspective and a governmental perspective and from a podcast perspective. And so, Sam, your company's from Toronto, but operating in Texas. Texas has been a very popular space. We talked about the need to educate our state representatives so that they can understand the benefits. And both of you spoke very eloquently about Texas's sort of all-in approach of collaboration. Where are we going to next? Do we think there are, Texas is a nice state to operate in for a lot of reasons. I just had a skiing trip to Colorado. That was pretty terrifying. Just driving up to the mountain, So like, what's going to be the next great state government? Where is our next spot to begin really testing and deploying these? Only so much freight moves from Dallas.
Yeah. So I was just going to say, I probably can't speak to like the exact locations that we're going to be going to, but I think
let's encourage the states to get on board. That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, no, but I guess what I would say is, for us, we're looking at expanding in kind of like a phased approach, right? So we have kind of like, we're looking at the I-35 corridor right now in Texas that goes from the Fort Worth area all the way down to Laredo. That's where we're really putting our effort in terms of commercializing that area. And then as we look to expand, we're going to have sort of like phase 1, phase 2, other states that we're going to be looking at. And, I think it's safe to say you obviously can't fly over certain states. So we're looking at, we were testing in New Mexico last year. We're looking at states that are adjacent to Texas, and especially as we think about kind of the key freight corridors that serve, the freight network system across the country, those are the kinds of areas that we're going to be looking at for sure. So
the one piece I'd add is California is the kind of missing piece of this equation, right? And the California DMV, this past year released draft rules about how AV trucking would finally be kind of embraced and allowed onto their roadways. We really kind of look forward to seeing what the next step is there. There's no more natural home outside of Texas, I think, for AV trucking than California. You have the amount of freight going up and down I-5, the ports of LA and Long Beach. It's the gateway to the east. There's just there's no reason that California really shouldn't be at the forefront of this, along with states like Texas and elsewhere. And look, we look forward to also embracing it north of the border. To your point, Sean, we're a proudly Canadian company. This is technology that we've been talking to folks kind of across Canada about the benefits it could bring there. That should absolutely be next on the kind of radar for deployments. But again, I think that there's a lot of work to be done up there too to embrace the openness that we've seen across the U.S.
Yeah. How about like a new ice road truckers, but there's no truckers?
Might be a boring show, but that's good for safety.
That's good for safety. That is right. Great. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation today, everybody, and really appreciate y'all coming and speaking to us. I'm hopeful for the future of AVs, and I'm glad that we've got really smart people like you guys helping to lead the way. Want to leave time for any extra questions from Steve and John, and of course, Sam and Anita, whatever you might have for parting shots here. But, just from my perspective, thank you for your work and keep it up for sure.
Yeah, I guess I do have one final question that I guess that's contemplated relating to the AV STEP program, and and I think GATIC announced it a couple months ago. This notion of a third-party independent assessment. So, because again, getting back to that government not understanding, again, you're right, Sam. It's not anything against them. They've been constructed for many, many years to do things a certain way. So, so what do you all have any viewpoint on that type of service that, could give the regulators some comfort, right? Give them some cover, and also have a standard way that, and also for the public, right? Communicate that to the public. It's not just us saying this, it's a third party independent. These experts, they, and I think Underwriter UL wrote a standard relating to this. So I just wanted to get your final thoughts on that, relating to that.
No, I mean, maybe I'll take a crack, Anita. I'd say that there's it's a really interesting approach, right? I think there's a lot of value to having external kind of evaluation of technology. I think, Steve, to the point you brought up, though, they need to evaluate it against something, right? So either that's your own company safety case, right? The promises and evidence that you're putting forward in terms of what the system can do versus what it can't. But I think standards are also a huge part of this, right? The standard setting bodies in general are the best kind of middle ground in some ways that we can find between regulatory agencies who may be a little bit new to understanding the very technical nature of AV systems, and the companies who kind of do all this every single day, and some of it might be kind of proprietary, right? That's what standard setting agencies do, and making sure we have kind of robust standards that the companies think are safe, that the companies think they can meet. But also are, get some buy-in from regulators so that they feel like they are safe enough and raising the floor. I think that's a really important piece too. And I know we've all had a lot of conversations with them about, okay, what can the future standards here look like? That's also a very American approach, right? It's we would then self-certify against those standards, in order to prove that we're safe to operate.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I agree. I think it's an interesting approach. I mean, I know at Torc, we have our own kind of internal safety management system, safety process. We even have our own kind of internal auditing and sort of, standards that we're a process of assessing how we think about safety. So, as Sam said, if there are other approaches out there that use kind of a third party, it's something for us, for folks to think about. One thing I will say though, is that I feel like, I'll just say, as a former US DOT person, I keep hearing a lot about the DOT, they don't really know, but I will say, I mean, I think understanding safety, this stuff is hard, right? And in the previous Trump administration, the DOT did release some policy statements and guidance. They did a bit of work, and so I do want to just say that I think people are thinking about these questions, right? They are thinking about, how do you consider a safety case? How do you truly assess safety in this sort of new world of vehicle technology and machine learning? So, I'll just say, I think there is thinking going on, and, we have yet to see how this will all play out. But...
Oh, there's no doubt. You're right. And I think everyone brings something to the table, right? And I think that's why the collaborative approach in this world that's new, I think in my view, it's a situation where 1 + 1 = 3. We're going to all benefit from it through that collaboration. So for sure.
And I really think that's key, right? Having that sort of transparency, that open dialogue, sort of raising the understanding about how we think about safety and technology and how we assess it, having that dialogue with the regulators, that's really the way that we're going to get somewhere, right, in terms of progress. So
nice. Well, hopefully this conversation will help illuminate some things that some other folks aren't thinking about right now. So thanks again. JB, anything for the peanut gallery before we go?
No, Anita, fan, they'll operate in just a really fascinating arena, and I appreciate you taking a little time to bring us up to speed on it, at least a little bit. It was a really good conversation. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks.
Great.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thanks all. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it very much. Thanks for listening to this episode of True North Truck Thought. If you enjoyed the topic today and want to tune in for future conversations here on the Triple T Pod, make sure to follow us. Also, please don't hesitate to let us know which topics you want us to cover in future episodes. Drop us a line in the comments section or send us an email to transportationnews@truenorthcompanies.com. Thanks and have a safe day.